If I knew it was going to be as hard as it has been to get this technology to work, I'm not sure if we would have done it. I'm so glad I didn't know. I'm so glad we were naive in our optimism.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Feldman, a senior editor at Forbes, and I'm here today with Matt de Jonge, co-founder and CEO of Fortell Research, a maker of AI-enabled high-end hearing aids. And I want to welcome you, Matt. How are you today?
Doing great. Honored to be here. Thank you for having us.
Great. I'm delighted that you're here. So start me at the beginning. I mean, it's not a typical type of company to start. You're young. You don't have obvious hearing aids. What got you into this?
Unfortunately, our origin story and my interest in this category stems from a very personal journey, watching my grandparents struggle with their hearing. And despite spending a lot of money on high-end hearing aids and traditional audiology, never finding success, particularly in background noise. And I watched 4 times as my grandparents just drifted away. And so when something happens to every one of your grandparents, you know, it's likely coming for the next generation. And watching them struggle just got me very, very interested in why their hearing aids weren't more effective, why I had to beg them to put them on. No one's ever needed to ask me to put on my glasses. And it sent me down a 15-year journey, which you might even call it an obsession, which 5 years ago, my colleagues and I decided was finally actionable, and we felt we could contribute. And thankfully, we really figured something out, I think, that has been able to help patients with hearing loss in new and exciting ways.
So from the 15 years idea to the 5 years starting it, why such a long gap? What's so hard about this problem?
So hearing loss is, the technical term is sensory neural. It's a loss that affects both the ear's ability to hear quiet sounds, but also the brain's ability to process the information coming at you. And so 15 years ago, when I looked at this problem of why my grandparents were struggling in challenging environments and why the hearing aids couldn't help, it was discouraging, because when you're limited by traditional software and signal processing technologies, you end up with this intractable problem of struggling to differentiate between sounds that are important and ought to be made louder and sounds that are just distracting. Traditional signal processing gives us frequency, amplitude, and time as basic primitives. That's the expressivity of these paradigms. And so when you're using frequency and amplitude and time, when you're using traditional techniques, you end up just being unable to differentiate between important stuff and unimportant stuff. When I realized that, I felt like this problem was just too hard, and it gave me a lot of humility. I was fortunate to get to play a role in a different high-tech healthcare startup called Butterfly Network, where we built an ultrasound machine on a chip. It gave me and my current co-founders a real education in how to do custom chip development as a small team, and also real-time AI in healthcare in these regulated contexts. 6 years after starting the Butterfly journey, Butterfly had gone public. We were in a position to be able to re-look at whether or not a real breakthrough was possible in hearing. Unfortunately, it was motivated by the next generation in my family starting to struggle. This time, we felt like the key technologies we learned at our previous startup did put us in a unique position to advance the state of the art in hearing. And so we found that using AI and a dedicated custom chip that could give us meaningfully more compute than any hearing aid ever could help us actually do what a hearing aid ought to do, which is understand the difference between important sounds and unimportant sounds, so that you can go to a noisy restaurant, amplify the conversation you want to have without the whole restaurant.
It's interesting. And you talked last week when we were talking a bit about the experience of being on Zoom in the pandemic, which I think everybody has, and realizing that the background noise on Zoom is also muted. Talk a bit about that realization, and is making a hearing aid basically like making Zoom?
Okay, yeah. So for years, I was quietly stewing on, how could you make a better hearing aid? How could you teach a hearing aid to amplify important stuff without amplifying everything? And it was discouraging because it just seemed too difficult. In the pandemic, we were all pushed to do our work over Zoom. And you may remember at the beginning of that period of time, every meeting was troubled by background noise. Lindsay, could you please mute? We can hear your dog, or you hear someone typing, and it was just really an annoying part of being pushed behind Zoom. And then over the next few months, that problem seemed to get better, and I noticed it, and it sent me down a rabbit hole to figure out what the heck is going on. When I realized that Zoom and similar platforms were using AI to filter sound on the basis of what it was, semantic filtering, instead of just primitive digital signal processing filtering, that was a really exciting aha moment. That began a 5-6 year mission of trying to take that magic and squeeze it into a hearing aid, which is subject to just many more constraints. Hearing aids have to run very, very quickly. You only have a few milliseconds to do your processing in a hearing aid. You have to run all day on a single charge. The signal to noise ratios that come into the device tend to be much more challenging than Zoom. So in every dimension, getting a hearing aid to filter on the basis of semantics is way harder than doing it in telephony or video conferencing. But Zoom and the pandemic gave us this proof of principle. It gave us this glimmer of hope that this might be possible. And, thankfully, we chased that hunch and got it working.
How was it to get the funding? Were you able to sort of convince investors easily, or was this a hard sell?
I think hearing loss is so prevalent that all of the investors we spoke with, their lives or the lives of their families were personally touched by hearing loss. And so we found great investors who were very receptive to this mission. The other thing that's interesting about hearing loss is it's just so common. It's like 1.5 billion people worldwide, going to 2 billion soon as people live longer. So it's this structural part of the human condition. Overall satisfaction rates with current technologies are low. So in a sense, as an investment thesis, the pearl is worth the dive. And so this company was easier to fund than we'd feared. And we've been very fortunate to get to work with some of the most wonderful, sophisticated, and deep-pocketed investors in venture capital.
It's interesting. And I know you've also been able to get as customers some of the sort of big names, including Henry Kravis and Steve Martin, who have talked about the hearing aids being very helpful to them. I'm curious how demand has been. You've got one location right now on the Upper East Side. They're fairly expensive, but I guess all hearing aids are fairly expensive. What do you see as the overall broader market for this?
We've been very fortunate that the response has been overwhelming. So our focus right now has been trying to increase supply enough to meet demand. So in New York City, we've extended hours. We've gone to 6 days a week. We've added audiologists. We're doubling the size of the clinic, and we're adding clinics in other major cities. For us, the challenging thing is scaling without ever compromising on quality. What we want to be in this market is the best combination of audiologists and hearing aid technology. I think if we can scale that without ever compromising on quality, then we'll do really well, and we'll be able to help more and more people. It's true that we have a disproportionate number of high-profile people in our current patient base. That was sort of a happy accident. Ultimately, we're trying to improve the plight of hearing loss for everybody, and we're trying to do it in a package that's very high value, even though the costs of high-end hearing aids are fairly high.
How many clinics do you think you could open?
I mean, every major city, I think, deserves a place where people can get awesome treatment for their hearing loss. So right now we're in New York City, Greenwich, Connecticut, Palm Beach. Soon we'll be in Boston, Miami, San Francisco, Palo Alto, LA, et cetera. So all the major cities, I think, we should be there soon. And the world is also a lot bigger than the United States. So we're working hard to make sure we can increase access to this technology as fast as possible without ever compromising on quality.
Okay, so you had talked earlier about your grandparents being the motivation for this. What would they think about this now if they could try out your hearing aids?
Everything we do at Fortell is designed to create a hearing loss solution that we wish had been available for our grandparents when they needed it. I hope what we could have done for them is given them more time as themselves. Hearing loss, in the case of my grandparents, and sadly, in the case of many people, many millions and millions of people, is associated with cognitive decline. And so the reason we do this is to try to help people stay themselves for longer and bring more joy and dignity to, a time that should be the happiest and most satisfying of their lives, and all too frequently um, can be the scariest and loneliest.
Have your parents also started experiencing hearing loss, and are they using the Fortell hearing aids?
My broader family members, aunts and uncles, are patients, um, and my parents, we bring them in routinely for hearing screening, and thankfully my parents don't have hearing loss yet, but I'd be shocked if they went and got a different hearing aid when the time was when the time was right.
I would assume they would have to get yours.
I would be offended if they didn't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hearing aids are also, I mean, as we've talked about, they're a somewhat odd market. There's about, whatever, 5 or 6 major players that have dominated for a long time. What has that been like as an upstart company trying to kind of David against Goliath kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the apathy of our competitors has been a competitive advantage for us. The traditional paradigm of hearing aids that by and large make everything louder, that rely on traditional signal processing techniques, has been around for about 30 years. And so there's 5 companies that have gotten very sophisticated in the amplification of sound. There's something exciting about a new paradigm, um, like the introduction and advent of artificial intelligence puts everybody on a level playing field. And so that created an opportunity for us to do something risky and aggressive that ultimately did work. And so, um, you know, we're just so grateful that the previous experience we had put us in a position to do this. That investors took a risky bet, and invested in 5 years of just deep technology research that might not have worked, that could have easily failed. Um, and what we're seeing from the competitors now is they're starting to take us very seriously, and I hope that um, it will mean that all patients, all customers who need hearing aids benefit from a more ambitious product development cadence as a result of our presence.
Are there things looking back on those 5 years that you either wish you knew at the beginning or sort of lessons that you would want to leave to other people who might be founding other sort of hard tech kind of startups?
Certainly, what I can say is if I knew it was going to be as hard as it has been to get this technology to work, I'm not sure if we would have done it. I'm so glad I didn't know. I'm so glad we were naive in our optimism. Um, I think what I would say is that entrepreneurs and inventors should not be afraid to attack really hard problems. Um, if you're trying to build a better mousetrap in a category where people really need that mousetrap and it can really help people in high stakes ways, um, ultimately that will be a good business. And if you could put together a credible plan, then you will find access to capital and talent.
I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you, Matt, for being with us.
Thank you so much.